Hey everyone, welcome to another Speed Secrets podcast. Today's guest is a NASA national champion, Bryce Kliewer. Welcome to the show, Bryce. This is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to talking to you. Thanks for joining me here.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for asking.
Hey, first, I guess congrats on your 2018 NASA championship. That was in the TT5 class, is that right?
Yep, that's right.
And I don't know, I'm just going to assume that you didn't have a chance to defend it this year with a crazy year that we've had.
Yeah, I was looking forward to going to Utah and taking another run at it. I got out to Miller a couple times this year, but they canceled Nats pretty early, so didn't get a chance for it.
Yeah, so next year?
Maybe it's in Daytona, which is geographically a bit of a bummer for me in Colorado. So we'll see. You know, it's always an option, but that's a pretty long tow out there. So we'll see what happens.
And I think anytime national championship is at Daytona, you kind of got to think, do I have the car that's going to draft well? Because I know, like the guys that run in Spec Miata or Spec Racer Ford and SCCA and stuff like that, they're like Daytona. Oh, that's all about the draft. And then if you've got a car that's not that good in a draft or in a straightaway, you're going, I'm not going to Daytona.
Yeah, it's less of a concern in TT because it's technically not legal to draft.
Yep.
So you got to pull out of the slipstream anyway. But yeah, for me, it's more around just time on task and not having ever driven there. I build pretty slowly, and so it's really hard to kind of go check out a new track and then to do so competitively. So that's kind of the bigger thing around driving out to a brand new place and trying to set super fast lap times. That's daunting for me. Is just not having any time on circuit.
So what was your path to where you are now in your your professional racing career, or maybe not quite professional, but yeah, how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, be a stretch to call it professional career for sure. It started out with just autocrossing. I've always kind of loved cars and wanted to go drive them quickly and at the limit. And driving at the limit is comes with a bunch of risk, but it doesn't come with any risk at autocross. And I think that's one of the things that's really, really cool and really compelling about that is kind of a hobby. And so just started with autocross. I had a WRX bug-eye wagon and used to go drive that thing at probably 11 or 12 twelfths around pieces of asphalt all over the Pacific Northwest, and had a couple trips out to Lincoln and got humbled, and decided to kind of get something a little bit more competitive, and found my way into a E46 BMW 330 and autocrossed that for a number of years, and then went out to the track one time and I'm like, ooh, this is cool. Look at what is this thing people call seat time? Let me try a little bit of this out. And so I just enjoyed some track days and HPDs, and eventually kind of worked my way into time trials and ultimately built that car, just from a safety standpoint, put a cage and, fire system in it. And so it's technically a race car, but I TT it, mostly. And so just kind of started getting into that way and met really great people along the way and have a, excellent racing family and community. Some really good friends out of a shop called SCR Performance up in Loveland, and they're, virtually family as it relates to the amount of time I spend with them over this traveling and racing. And so I got into NASA and, been kind of doing that, for the last couple of years.
So I'm curious, you said earlier on when you were talking about going to Daytona and the new track, it's like you kind of said, I think you kind of said, it takes me a little while to get there. And yet autocross and time trials, it's all about going fast. You don't have 4 laps to get warmed up. You got to go now. Is that a strength of yours? Like when you get on a track? Because I know you've also done some like World Racing League, some endurance stuff. Like, are you one of those drivers that does get up to speed quickly, or is that something you're still working on, I guess?
Yeah, it's certainly something I always work on and struggle with. I find it to be less of a barrier in autocross because the risk is so much lower. Right? Like I like to say that I am the fastest person out there for my level of risk aversion. But my risk aversion is pretty damn high, and so it takes me a while to kind of build up to that. Where in autocross, there's really no it's consequence free by and large, other than having a bad run or over driving something. And so you can kind of find the limit. I feel much faster in an autocross because I'm willing to exceed it and then bring it back to where the car is actually quick. Whereas on the track, it will take me much longer to get up to the limit. I'm much less likely to go over the limit and then dial it back. And so it just takes more time as I inch my way towards it. Where in autocross, I'm happy to go over it and dial it back. And so I think that approach to being able to fly past it and bring it back, I don't do on the track in ways I see other people do. I raced with, quick anecdote. I raced with, I always call him like a 15-year-old kid, but I think he just went off to college this year. So he's not a kid anymore, but I've been racing with him for a number of years. And our approaches to racing couldn't be different. Like we'll go out and we're on a new track that we're both learning for the first time. And he's like, oh yeah, this corner is flat. He'll come in and tell me after the very first session. And I'm like, well, how'd you know that? He's like, oh, because I went through it flat. And he's like, but this corner is not. And I'm like, how'd you learn that? He's like, because I almost put it off the outside there and I had to do a panic brake and catch it and bring it back in. And meanwhile, I didn't take either of those two corners flat. And so just very different approaches. And I don't find the autocross is a prohibitor, for overdriving, where I find the track, and the risk associated with it is.
So some of that just seems, it's that, and it's a pretty classic thing. I mean, a lot of drivers have had this experience, I think, either way, like you have, is it's that trust knowing that, okay, if I go over the limit, I can still bring it back. And it sounds like you're in that, I trust that if I drive up to the limit, I'm okay. But if I drive it over the limit, I may not be able to bring it back. Whereas you say the 15-year-old kid who's maybe not quite 15 is like, well, I'll just go over the limit and I'll bring it back after. I'll still bring it back. That's the difference, right?
Or he's not worried about bringing it back.
Yeah. Okay.
He's fine pitching it off the outside and like learning that way. It's just a different approach. I think, again, different risk tolerance levels and my risk aversion levels is, I have quite a bit of risk aversion, which is a funny thing. And people don't believe it. They're like, well, you race cars. How are you risk averse?
Yeah. It's all relative though, right?
It's all relative.
Yeah. Risk averse to somebody playing chess. Well, maybe, I guess there is risk in chess. It's just there's no physical harm that's going to be caused that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
That's interesting. But so I'm curious though, how, when you have done some of the endurance racing, how has the autocross and time trial experience, how has that helped you, and how has it maybe held you back?
Yeah, I think the a lot of it translates well. I mean, driving a from autocross, I think you'll see a lot of people at autocross that can get into track stuff pretty well, and seemingly less the other direction, which I've always found interesting.
Yep.
It's such a learned hobby or sport or activity, autocross is, that there's nobody who's just ever gotten in the car for the very first time and been quick. And so I find that to be, a very nice leveling factor as it relates to autocross. It's something that just takes time, and takes reps, to get good at. But you do learn just a tremendous amount of car control doing it, because you are just constantly, you're moving the cars, a lot of car transitions at the limit. And so your car control game goes up pretty exponentially with autocross. And so that translates nicely to the track. And then obviously just running a fast lap by yourself in an endurance race, translates perfectly well to time trials. What doesn't translate, right, is anything that has to do with racecraft, and knowing like when to, take a chance and put your car next to somebody, doesn't translate at all. And so again, my racecraft is non-existent to poor. It'll take me many laps to pass somebody that's, noticeably slower than I am. And just, have to like sit behind him and find out where they're really, really weak and then take the pass. And even if the car is faster, sometimes I'll still be pretty apprehensive around it. But if I can get by him, then that's when the time trials kind of, skill sets in, and I can just run really quick, qualifying laps, lap after lap. And so some translates and some doesn't, but it's definitely, you don't learn in autocross and in TT, you don't learn any racecraft, and you don't learn the kind of the seeing and feeling of when you can get around somebody. And, when somebody makes a mistake, when you're racing, your natural reaction for me is just a lift, right? It's like, oh no, this person's loose coming out of the corner. I better lift because they're unpredictable and they may spin. And that's the exact opposite reaction you need to have if you want to get around them.
Yeah.
Right. Like my innate reaction is completely inverse to what you should be doing to pass. And so I do find that in races where it's like perfect passing opportunity and I'm lifting. Where somebody that's more attuned to kind of racing and better racecraft is like, oh, perfect. Finally, the opportunity I've been waiting for. And I'm like, oh no, they're going to spin. So that hasn't translated at all. But other parts have, and certainly, the enjoyment of it, just being in the car and trying something different and new is a huge part of what I enjoy about it as well.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I see somebody get a little crossed up and I immediately think, okay, take advantage of that. But
exactly. We're wired completely opposite in that regard, right? And I think that's another learned skill, right? In the same way that autocrossing is a learned skill. I think that that putting your foot into the floor instead of lifting it when you see somebody making a mistake is a learned skill.
Yeah. And what's interesting for me was I did a couple of autocrosses like before I really got racing. And then just went into racing. And the next time I did an autocross was when I was racing Indy cars. And a local club asked me to sort of come out and come out and talk to them. And then somebody says, hop in my car and go do a run or two. And it's like, oh my God, the pressure's on here.
Yeah.
and it's funny because I think I'm coming up to the start line and like my heart's racing harder than had I been in an Indy car at the time. But I can go reasonably quick on an autocross course because I'm really comfortable like overdriving the car. But where the great autocrossers I've seen is they can then just dial that back to that perfect little finding that limit. I can go beyond the limit, but it takes me a while. It would take me a lot of time to then dial that back to that perfect limit part. And I think that's great autocrossers are just great at.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, so when you're not racing, you have a pretty successful. It seems like a really successful, professional career in business. And what is it? You're the vice president, enterprise project management office at Oracle, which seems like a pretty wow, dude. That's serious stuff. Yeah. I'm kind of curious, and I'd love to just kind of pick your brain here a little bit on what have you learned from racing that applies to business, and just kind of hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of analogies and metaphors in explaining and describing things. I think it just paints such a vivid picture for people and can really connect concepts and terms. And so I'm sure my employees hate me for this because you kind of go to what you know a little bit. And so I'm constantly, creating obscure analogies with racing concepts and applying them to leadership or applying them to business problems. And it's an extremely low percentage analogy set, right? Because it makes complete sense to me, and it's extremely visual and vivid in my mind when I think about it, and I'm sure it makes zero application to the people I work with that don't race. But nonetheless, I still default to these a lot, and I see a lot of parallels in kind of business and in leadership and in racing. And so I do spend time thinking about these parallels and the objectives in business and the strategies that you take. And then a lot of tactics associated with that, have tons of overlap. And so I use these analogies all the time, I'm sure much to like disappointment, chagrins, and annoyance of my employees. But just to give an example of one of these, right? So like think about vision, right? Yeah. And there's so many stories about sim racers, going pro. Mm-hmm. And we find that the majority of what makes drivers fast, like it's not kinesthetics, right? It's visual. And seemingly then like looking ahead is kind of the thesis, I think, that of most driver coaches I've ever seen, right? It's just like, you got to look ahead, you got to use your vision. And that clearly applies when you think about the ability for somebody to get out of a sim rig and into a real race car and be successful. And, in business, there's tons of analogies to that. And, one of my favorite terms there is this kind of concept of direction over speed, meaning you need to know where you're going from before you start deploying resources on a project, right? And lack of vision leads to like imminent employee frustration because you're constantly changing direction and you're throwing out code and you're starting all over. And the manifest of that is employee underperformance and churn. Like, people don't want to work in environments where you set them up and you got them all excited about a project, and then a week later you changed your mind. And so you're constantly getting people excited about things, but you're never focusing on the direction. You're just focusing on the speed. And so the concept of direction over speed. And so the application, right? It's look ahead, plan your next move, take time to get this area of practice right before you go out and, quote unquote, turn laps. So figure out what it is you want to do, and then work on techniques that improve your vision. And in racing, right, you're constantly working on racing techniques to improve your vision. And you talk a lot about like sensory laps, where you're just going to go out and just absorb as much information as you can and think about what it is, the intent of what you want to go do. And in business, it's really making sure that you have clarity and your team has clarity about what the mission is you want to do and where you want to take the team. And so great leadership and great racing both start with a really great vision. And so that's kind of like, one example that I might apply from like an analogous standpoint to talk about how these two things have, lots of similarities in it.
Well, first of all, when you first talk about the analogies, and recently I went and got my annual medical, and the doctor is trying to explain something to me, and I can see him, and he's like, it's like a car, because he knows that I'm into cars and racing, and he's like trying to figure out an analogy, but he doesn't know cars and driving well enough, but he's like struggling away and trying to figure it out, and comes up with this kind of, a good effort, but maybe not the best analogy. But it was like, I would kind of wanted to say, just tell me, like, forget the analogy. So that was kind of a funny thing. But the vision thing, and maybe this is this is maybe more of a business question than a driving thing. But
yeah,
one of the things about, you drive a car through a corner, and you realize you're going to miss the apex, and you can kind of do two things there. One is you can try to force it down to the apex, or you can go, okay, I missed it, I'm going to let it go, I'll get it next lap. And one is not always the right way of doing it, but generally, if you just like, okay, I'm going to force it down to that apex, you end up overslowing, or maybe even spinning the car in attempting to do that. And at some point, you kind of got to let go and let the car go. And it's kind of related to vision, but how does that apply to business? And I'm just kind of curious for my own business thinking is there a time though where you kind of got to go, okay, we thought we were going there, but we've missed the apex, and we realized that actually running wide isn't all that bad. I don't know.
Yeah. I think you're alluding to kind of the concept of like a sunk cost, which is you maybe invested a lot into something, and then suddenly like, the juice is not worth the squeeze. And that happens really frequently in, my particular kind of area in business, which is the data cloud, which is really ad tech and MarTech. And the landscape changes really quickly and really dramatically, and both from a technologies we use standpoint. Like almost none of the technologies that we use today, we used 5 years ago. And by that, I'm talking about underlying hardware and software. And so we've completely had to migrate to, cloud infrastructures, migrate to new types of code, migrate to systems that can handle the size of the data that we use. And so there is a fair amount of, what's called like tech debt, or in this case, like things that become throwaway over time. And the product set also changes, where what clients needed, a month ago, they may no longer need now. And so if it takes you 2 months to develop software, and you're a month in and the client's needs have changed, you need to acknowledge that as a sunk cost, and you just need to move on. you need to say, this is not my corner. And all you can do then is, same within racing, you're just trying to minimize time lost.
Yeah.
And make adjustments to utilize what you can, throw away what you can't, put that behind you, and try to set, vision for the next corner. And, in kind of in that case, all you would be doing is just acknowledging a sunk cost that you've incurred. You'd go out and say, hey, here's what changed. In this case, I went in the corner 3 miles an hour too fast. I had no hope of hitting my apex. So I decided to let it go deep, and round the thing off. And that would be a great analogy that would make no sense to any of my employees, and I'd use it nonetheless. And they would say, so so here's what we thought to be true when we started this. Here's what's true now. Here's why we're going to abandon that plan and move on to the next one. And, and hopefully it's more a function of not a lack of your vision as a leader, but, a lack of a changing environment that caused the change, such that you're not, constantly on your heels, or you don't lack vision as a leader, but more so that you can communicate to people why you have to make the change. And so I think that notion of like a bad corner really is a function of, either bad vision, you didn't see it, or things changed. Let's say, there was oil on the track, right? And something was different than you thought it was going to be. And either way, you have to alter course. And what you've done to that point is moot, right? It's sunk cost.
Okay, I got to remember sunk cost. One of the things that I see, I guess one of the traits that I see of great drivers is their ability to learn quickly. And that's also got to have some application in the business world. Yeah.
Yeah. I think about that a lot as, there's, I think, a couple parts to it, right? There's certainly a notion of continual improvement, which is you try something, you tweak it, you try something else, you see what works, you see what doesn't, right? There's this notion of like a God complex, which is you already know the answer. You believe you're preordained to have the answer. And then all you're trying to do is make the data fit what you already believe. And the alternate of that, and the other side of that coin, is kind of the test and chase model, which is you pretend you don't know anything. And then the only thing you can learn is what you observe and the feedback loop that's provided therein, and make improvements on that. And I'm a much bigger fan, obviously, of the test and chase model than I am of the God complex model. Yeah. And so I think you need to constantly be looking for increased feedback loops. And one of those, right, is metrics and data itself. And we use that to understand what's going well and what's not going well. Ultimately the objective arbiter of truth when it comes to racing is lap times or finishing position. Mm-hmm. And so you have that. But that's more of the outcome, right? Setting a fast lap and winning a race is an outcome, but it's not a strategy in itself. So then you have to drill a layer down and say, all right, well, what are the strategies? Turning fast laps is a strategy to winning a race. Racecraft is a strategy. Car configuration is a strategy. And then underneath that, you have all the tactics associated with it, right? And so, so for fast laps, that may be vision and, car physics management or car control, stress management. And so, all of those things, and those are the things you can work on, and you have to find feedback loops for, and you have to improve on. And so I think, the fastest drivers are ones that are always trying to find another tenth here and there. And, it's, as opposed to getting to a lap time that they're happy with, they're comfortable with, or think can win the race. They're just constantly pushing. And so I think this notion of continual improvement, and I talk about that a lot, from a work environment as well, which, particularly in teams like operations groups that I've run before, the goal is to turn the crank, right? It's just produce the widget. But the goal is also to turn the crank better and to get better at turning it every day and find ways to gain efficiencies and make your life easier and make the process better and make it faster. And that has a lot to do with kind of a lean mindset and, a continual mindset. And I think that applies directly to really fast racers.
For sure, the best drivers that I know, I mean, they're never satisfied. You're right. They're always looking for another 10th or 100th or whatever it is, right? But as you were talking, it made me think of the phrase that I hear a lot especially in the tech industry, is this idea of fail fast. And
Yep.
I guess in a way that applies to racing as well, does it?
Yeah, I mean it's classic kind of agile project management, right? Which is, you want to learn, and this gets back a little bit to the sunk cost, right? You're less likely to have something you have to throw away and that becomes a large sunk cost if you can understand it's not a good market fit sooner and faster. So as soon as you can realize something's going to succeed or something's going to fail, that's an excellent feedback loop. And you want to know that as soon as possible before you've deployed tons of resources on it. And so that fail fast, continual improvement and understanding the metrics associated with it is a component of that. But you certainly want to build prototypes as early as you can, get them into market and see what's going to stick and what's not going to stick. And that gets back a little bit to that test and chase model, right? Like see what's going to work in the smallest incremental bite size as possible. And if it looks like it's got a good market fit, then you start investing resources in it. And, another good term for that is kind of like crawl, walk, run, right? Yeah. Which is you don't start, assuming you're going to kind of head out of the gate, with a completely successful, GA or generally available product. You start with the crawl. You start with small bites that are deployable code and follows kind of a little bit more of an agile product development mindset.
Which is, hey, start off slow, learn the basics, build your skills and everything. But again, talking about this fail fast thing, I know a lot of drivers. I've seen a lot of drivers who they do fail fast, but they're so fast or so quick to want to move on to something else that they haven't learned from what they haven't learned the lesson from the fail part of it. They just, okay, we failed there. Let's move on and do it again. Oh, we failed again. Oh, we move on. And the classic is when a driver crashes, often it wasn't that last mistake that caused it. It was a mistake they made 3 corners ago that got them out of line and got their mind thinking about that. So they didn't learn from the first mistake.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the crashes that I've seen or been privy to is when you're stuck behind somebody and you finally get around them, and then 3 corners later, you have an incident, and it's just kind of like pent up like energy from like finally accomplishing some goal that you lose sight of the mission a little bit. I think digesting and processing, what's working and what's not working is really important. And again, like this kind of, the crawl, walk, run with small bites. The parallel I draw there is if you can't go fast in a slow car, you can't go fast in a fast car.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, hey, I'm interested in racing. I had a lot of people that are like, hey, I'm interested in racing. What do you recommend? And my first answer is like, get something slow.
Yeah.
Like, get a slow car. Weight transfers still happen, in a slow car. All the physics apply in a slow car as they do in a fast car. They just happen slower.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so you can feel them, and you can adjust, and you can adapt to them, and you can process it better. I like you get, I have a number of friends that come out and these absolute track weapons now.
Yeah.
These 911s that can just do insane speeds down the straight. They'll spin it and you come in and you go, what happened? And they've got no idea.
Right.
Because everything just happens so damn fast. Where anyone that's ever, gone off course in a spec Miata can tell you exactly how it happened, because they probably crashed 3 times in the same corner on their way off the track. He can walk you through the whole thing in great detail.
Right.
And so, I think that that this notion of like crawl, walk, run, or like small bites or agile has a lot to do as well with, I think, how you can approach getting fast as a driver. And that's starting in, small bites. Start with a slow car. It's costs are proportionate to speed and risk is proportionate to speed, but fun is not. Like, I think you can have just as much fun, again, back to like everything's relative. You can have just as much fun, going side by side at 80 miles an hour as you can at, 130. And you can learn a lot more because you're able to process it and you're able to digest what happened, and you're able to feel the transfers and the slip angle, and you're able to actually correct it because the car is just not as pointy. And so I think that notion of like small bites and, crawl, walk, run, or kind of agile, development, see what works and adjust and test and chase. All that applies. certainly in software development, but it applies tremendously, I think, on the raceway.
And the thing that I was thinking about there was, again, some drivers, their bandwidth, their mind bandwidth is so used up just to keep the car pointing in the right direction that they make a little mistake and they don't know what happened. And, I was going to say often, sometimes a driver will come in after a crash and I'll say, what happened? They go, I don't know. And, another driver, they'll come in and they crash and you go, what happened? They go, well, I did this and I did this and I did this and then that happened. And you're like, okay, well, at least you had the bandwidth to be able to learn while that was happening. It's one thing to be able to sit down even afterwards and go, yeah, when I did this and when I watched the video, this is what I did wrong. But it's another to have the bandwidth to be able to do that at speed, I guess. And I don't. Maybe this is one of the flipping the other way. Is this is one of the things that people, great business leaders, are able to, in the heat of the moment, see what's going on and learn from it while it's happening and go, okay, now we need to fix this.
Yeah, and I think that boils down to stress management. Like how well are you able to? I mean, think about what's happening to your body just, physiologically as you're entering, as you're heading the end of a long straight, and you're hitting a slow speed corner. So huge adjustment in speed. I mean, I can almost feel my eyes dilating sometimes when I'm doing that, and that's really poor stress management. And in the same way that great leaders under high stress need to control their physiological reaction and be comfortable with that, so too do racing drivers have to be able to manage that. And that's one of my favorite things about racing is this. It's almost a mind over matter exercise. Like I was racing at Thunder Hill, a track I'd never driven a couple of years ago, and there's that kind of bypass there that's just a big uphill. And then it crests and it goes downhill. It's a little bit off camber and it's a little right-hand corner. And to do it fast, you need to be on throttle and all the way up and over it. Some throttle maintenance just to keep the car balanced. And, the first 20 laps out there, I was doing a little brake check before the top just to settle the car and then just kind of coasting over it and then adding gas. And I knew it wasn't the fast way around, but, really it's all I could handle. And then slowly built up, and finally I'm like, let's do this. Like, we're staying on throttle, and it went up over it on throttle and came down, and it was super handsy. Like my body was not managing the stress well still. And so, it came over the top and, it was really loose and barely kept it on the track and, kind of set the nose. But I made it, right? I'd survived, and I'm like, all right, well, now it's time to do that every lap, which can be really frustrating when you make a mistake sometimes and you go through something really fast and you're like, oh no, I have to do it every time now. That's a terrifying experience to recognize that. And so I came over and I'm like, this is now what I have to do. And, 2 hours later of drive time, I was super calm, staying, largely flat, going up and over the hill. And that was stress management. And so that ended up being, that was replication. So that was managing it through experience and through replication. And I think a lot of that, applies to business here, where, the more experience you have in something, the better you get at it for gaining that type of consistency. And so think about, presenting to a large audience, from a leadership standpoint or a business standpoint. The first time you've ever done that, you're terrified. Physiologically, your cortisol shoots through the roof and your heart rate accelerates. And, you have all sorts of weird physiological reactions in the exact same way that you do when you go into a corner extremely quickly that you haven't done before. But you get a handful of reps and suddenly it's not as scary. And so I think stress management is a big aspect of how you stay calm under pressure in business. And to some degree, it's having been there and done that before, and having reps at it, in the same way that I think stress management at the racetrack is being able to manage the physiological reaction that you have. And that increases bandwidth. Like when your cortisol levels haven't spiked and your adrenaline isn't pumping, you have more bandwidth to see other things.
Yeah. Well, and to me, some of this is, it comes back to the mental programming. If you've got a program to go over the top of that hill with your foot flat to the floor, you'll do that. But we develop that programming by either physically doing it a number of times, or we can mentally do that. And there's a lot of drivers who can sit in a chair at home and see themselves coming up over the top of the hill with their foot flat to the floor. But can they see themselves doing that while driving the car at speed? It's a different skill. I'm not saying maybe not a different skill, but it's another layer of that skill to be able to do that mental imagery or see that image of doing what you're supposed to do while at speed. And I guess, same kind of thing. I mean, great leaders, they can see that while in the heat of the moment.
Yeah. And, you referred to it kind of as trust before, right? Like they trust that it will stick. I think it's more probability, right? Like what's the likelihood that this thing, and your sensitivity around the probability of it staying increases as you have more reps because you have more data points, right? It's like going through a corner, flat for the first time. If you've never done the corner, you have your N is equal to 0. And then you go through it once, you have an N of 1. And you don't have a lot of data with which to create the likelihood of this thing sticking. And you only gain that through repetition.
Yeah.
And you only gain data points through repetition. So I think about it a lot less as, as trust just being this thing that you have, willfully and hopefully, and boy, I trust that it'll work out. Like what you actually have, if you're going to be a responsible leader and if you're going to be a smart, consistent racer, is you have data points.
Yeah.
And you have probabilities associated with it. And so, the notion of like stress management, I think for really good leaders is they have high probability that they're going to be able to succeed, in working their way out of the problem, aligning the team in a new direction. And stress management in someone who's racing has probability that the car is not going to fly off the track and kill them in a ball of fire. Right. And so it's all around getting data points such that you can kind of create this probabilistic curve around likelihood of success. And, back to the, public speaking, you get a bunch of reps doing it. You're more confident that people aren't going to mock you and, your worldview falls apart and your ego dissolves, because you've got reps on it. And so I think it's just more of a probability thing than it is, true trust. I guess I like the term probability more than trust when I think about, behavior, when I think about, managing stress.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And it is a whole lot easier. Just get out there, Bryce, and trust. That's kind of like saying to a depressed person, be happy.
Yeah, why aren't you happier?
Yeah. Like, okay, that doesn't, it's not getting to the root of the cause, which working through the probability part of it can get you there. So, hey, let's just flip this around for a minute here. What are the big things that you've learned from your business career that you've applied to the way you approach racing?
Yeah. I mean, so I think one big one, and this one maybe seems obvious and self-evident, but I think the notion of having fun is really, really critical to me. And so in work, I talk about the fact that a third of your life, of your waking life, is in your office chair. And, maybe not literally, but you are, at work for, the average Americans at work for a third of their waking life.
Yeah.
Which is a tremendous amount of time. And so you better be having fun doing that. And there's lots of ways to try to incorporate, levity and, not taking yourself too seriously and, enjoying, the work that you're doing and enjoying the peers and people around you, from a work standpoint. But to me, that's absolutely critical from kind of a work perspective, is to be able to enjoy what you're doing. And whether you're finding meaning in your work or not, I think you can still enjoy, your coworkers and the types of problems that you're solving and, the environment that you create. And that certainly relates to the track. I mean, how many times you've been out of the amateur race and there's a bunch of really frustrated people, and whether they're with the results, or they're frustrated with their competition, or they're frustrated with, their cars and how they're performing, whatever it is, there tends to be, there's a fair amount of frustration in amateur racing. And I think that, comes from people that had higher expectations than what they were able to deliver on. But man, if you're not having fun at your hobby, which I believe everybody out there at a amateur club race is out there as a hobby. If you're not having fun doing that, you got to find yourself a new hobby. And so this notion, I think, of like having fun and making sure to not ever take myself too seriously, even in amateur racing, I think is really important. In the same way that I want to apply, having levity and being relaxed and enjoying myself while at work. I think the same thing has to apply to racing.
Okay, so I'm going to challenge that a little bit because I mean, first of all, every driver. The last thing I say to every driver that I coach is have fun. but sometimes I question myself. It's kind of like, okay, so you have an employee in your office and you just say, have more fun at work, and the employee's going, seriously?
Yeah, I think it's a culture that you set, which is the root of it is you can't take it too seriously. And maybe I have the benefit of I don't work in a hospital, so I'm not saving lives, right? Like if we have a bad day at the office, an advertiser, sells less mac and cheese efficiently. And so I think it's the stakes are low, right? The stakes are really low, and the stakes are really low in amateur racing too. If you just take 2 steps back and look at what you're doing, it's a hobby and it's an expensive one, but it's how you're choosing to spend your free time. So you damn well better enjoy it. And I completely understand. I mean, I'm extremely competitive. I don't like losing. I spend a lot of time studying the craft of racing and, going to seminars like yours and reading books and, for the purpose of getting better, right? And sitting behind a sim wheel, for the purpose of getting better. But I also have to continually remind myself that, hey, you better be having fun and to make sure you're bringing that, like bring the fun to the track. And people are like, so how was your race weekend? Did you win? And I'm like, well, hopefully the answer is yes. But if not, I still probably had a really good time with kind of my racing family. And we for sure had a bunch of beers in the evenings and some good trash talking while driving and some good stories and some excellent bench racing and some data analysis. And even a bad race weekend from a result standpoint is still a pretty good time. And I just need to make sure I keep that topical. And so, that's one of these like business application ones where, it's easy to just be like, hey, have more fun. But you actually, you get to make a choice around that to some degree on whether you want to come in and be, upset about it. Like you get to choose your reactions, to things and your emotions to things. And just how you show up, sets the tone. And, I'm sure you've been in a group of people where somebody comes in and they set the tone, right? Yeah. With a bad attitude. And that's contagious, right? Energy is contagious.
Yes.
And it is at a physiological level. Like, there's a neuro response concept that happens where you respond to people's behavior subconsciously, whether you want to or not. And, my favorite example of that's the old smiling studies, right? Where when you smile at somebody, they have to smile back. It's an auto response, right? So it's this weird, like you smile, somebody smiles back. Well, what happens when you actually physically smile? The physical act of smiling changes your brain chemistry slightly, and it improves your mood. And so those muscles being activated, that physical mechanism creates a neuro response to improve your mood. So by smiling at somebody and then being forced to smile back at you, improves their mood. And frowning works in reverse, right? And so you actually have the ability to influence people around you, at a subconscious level, whether you recognize it or not. And so you do have the ability, without saying, hey, have more fun. Like you have the ability to influence people around you and do so at a very subconscious level. And I think that's a very powerful concept that we should all kind of carry with us, which is how we present ourselves. And so how you present yourself at work, if you want people to have fun, is not show up like a jerk and not bring a negative intensity and not be cynical. It's to show up with a good attitude. It's to show up, with positivity and with optimism. And, frankly, it's to smile. And there's a huge aspect of that. And the same thing's true at the racetrack.
So I love that, Bryce. And to the point where I'm sitting here with a big smile on my face. And I wonder how many people listening to this podcast right now have a smile on their face. Like I bet a large percentage of them have a smile on their face because of that. So Thank you. That was, I could not agree more, which is, and I think going back and just thinking about why am I doing this? Sometimes when you're at the track and you are having one of those frustrating days, I can't go faster. The data system isn't working. I forgot to turn on the GoPro. I mean, all those things that go wrong, and you go.
You mean every single session?
Yeah. It's like, but why am I doing this? Because when I get in the car and I feel it, and I'm dancing with that car on the edge of however close I want to be to that edge. What a feeling, right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, the ability to kind of find a state of flow for me while racing, it's one of the easiest places that I get to do that. So it becomes a bit of an escape. But at the same time, it's such a mind over matter challenge as well. And which can be frustrating because when your mind doesn't conquer the matter, it's frustrating. But when it does, you can find great joy in that. And to understand too that, part of it's just the process. Like part of it is learning, which can be frustrating. You're going to have good days and bad days. You'll have days where you go worse, slower than you did the day before. But that kind of continual improvement and making sure that you're enjoying the process still, I think super critical. But yeah, you'll probably have more bad days than good days and more opportunities to find faults, and times when things went wrong than not. It's a lot harder to win than it is to show up.
Wow.
But I think there's a lot of life lessons in racing, I guess, put it that way. And there's a lot of life lessons in business.
And they overlap. So that's cool. To wrap this up, and I was going to ask you, what advice would you give to listeners? What is your speed secret? And maybe you've just given it. I don't know. But do you have another one? Because that last one was so perfect.
I think the one thing we kind of didn't touch on, outside of having like a good race family, is that no one wins a championship alone. And the building of a car and the learning of racecraft and the talking through and the same kind of things we're doing today, talking through race philosophy or work philosophy, or even in this case, I think it all ends up being life philosophy. You need someone to talk it through and to bounce ideas off and, see what sticks and what doesn't stick. And things are going to resonate with certain people and not resonate with others. And so the notion that nobody wins championships alone, I think is important, and finding your group of people at the racetrack that become kind of your racing family, I think is really critical. And it's critical for having fun and enjoying yourself at the track. I think it's critical for learning. And I think it's critical for being, successful ultimately in the long run. And so, I think that the speed secret here is to don't think about racing. Well, it feels pretty hyper individualized when you're in the car by yourself, driving around, trying to pass people and making your own decisions. There's a lot around the peripheral that comes from having an extremely strong team. And, there's no leader. You can't even be a leader without a team, right? There's no such thing, right? And companies are built by people, and they are people and comprised entirely of them. And in absence of those people, the companies don't exist. And I think to a great extent in the absence of, your racing family or the people around you who you draw energy from and you draw experience from, and you draw experience from, without that, you won't be a successful racer. And so I think it's really important to think about building teams in that way. And the way that you would build a team in business to be successful, you need to build a team in racing to be successful, and draw energy from that. So I think the speed secret here is view this less as individual sport and more as a team sport.
And again, I love that. And it doesn't matter whether you're driving for Roger Penske and his massive team, or you think, I just take my car to the track, I'm my team. Well, did anybody help you prep your car? Who do you buy your tires from? What about your spouse? What about your friends? Just the support that you get, that's part of your team as well. So I love that part of it.
Yeah, buddy, it gave you the camber specs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And big difference certainly between autocross and road racing. The autocross community is extremely open. I've found, and gives back in a way that seems different in the track groups around knowledge and their ability to share information and get specs. But yeah, the kind of family and your support team is broad. And yeah, thinking about it as a person who, towed your car down there is the wrong way, I think, as much as where you even drawing, who you bouncing track ideas off, who you doing a track walk with. And so to some degree, folks like yourself and what the content you guys, you create, I think is super powerful as part of that as well.
Yeah. Well, Bryce, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been really fun. I often say it's not what we learn about driving and racing. It's what we learn from driving and racing that really makes the biggest difference in our lives. So this has been a really, really fun conversation, and I look forward to bumping into you at a track soon, somewhere, sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great chat with you, Ross. Thanks for having me on. Thanks.
And I don't need to tell you this, but I always say this at the end. I always say, keep learning and having fun, but I already know you're doing that.
That's right. If nothing else, those are the only two things I'm doing.
Yeah. Same here.
All right. Right on, Ross.
Thank you.
Thanks for the time. Yeah. Bye.
Need something to identify yourself as a serious competitor in iRacing? Something to wear when you are laying around the house or hanging out in the garage? Or even better, something to prove to all your friends at the track that you know what you're doing? Well, Ross has the gear for you. Go to speedsecrets.com/gear to check out the t-shirts, polo shirts, and hats. Show off that you're part of the Speed Secrets team. Go get them. Have some fun.